Is the Lumix GH5 a relevant camera in 2020? Let's talk about this.
Flash like a memory, your bellows in your mind. Ride around, feel like I know every your mind. I don't know what hurt you.
What's up guys, Rosette Production here, and today we're going to be talking about the Lumix GH5 in 2020. And be sure to click that bell notification button so you guys can keep up to date with all of my new content that drops on this channel. And for those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. I post a lot of music video behind the scenes, filmmaking tips and tricks videos, filmmaking vlogs, and so much more. So go check out all my other videos because you will definitely learn something new on this channel as a filmmaker. So I originally started with the Lumix GH4, which was an amazing camera for its time. It was ahead of its time. It was just unbelievable. It was a great camera. But when the Lumix GH5 came out, it just offered things that were the next step ahead of the Lumix GH4, and I had to cop it. So let's break down the Lumix GH5 here in 2020. I love the ergonomics of this. I'm a big Lumix user. I use the Lumix S1, that's what I'm shooting off of right now. The things I love about Lumix cameras, at least with the GH4, GH5, honestly, even like the G7, I've kind of played around with the G7 before, is the ergonomics. Ergonomics are everything for me. I need a camera that fits my hand really well, and that has a really nice button layout. That just means a lot for me in terms of like convenience sake. And I mean, any camera that you use, you're gonna get used to over time, just the more that you use it. But for me, the second I picked up the GH5, it just felt great in my hand and I just fell in love with it instantly. The flip out screen is very clutch. The Lumix S1 and S1H do not have this. I wish it did, but it doesn't. I've gotten used to the tilt screen now. I actually really do enjoy it. It's very subtle. It feels strong. It doesn't feel like anything's gonna snap off. But I mean, the flip out screen is always really clutch. You know, when I'm shooting YouTube content, I can flip out this screen and I can, you know, see myself. I can see what's in focus, whereas Lumix S1, I can't. So even for vlogging too, I mean, I still use the GH5 every now and then for vlogging, and it's great because I can flip out this screen. And honestly, when I'm shooting music videos, which you guys know me for, I'll flip out the screen and I'll tilt it and I can rest the screen on my forearm or my wrist while I'm shooting my handheld scenes. This is great. I love the flip out screen for that. Now, in terms of camera specs for 2020, honestly, the GH5 does hold up. I mean, yes, it's a micro four thirds sensor, so it's not gonna be a low light killer, but I mean, I will say a straight up con like right away is these things suck for low light because of the small sensor on these things. It's not a full frame sensor. I am honestly a little sketched out to go past like 1250 ISO, which is really sad, honestly, because with the S1, I have dual native ISO. So not only is it great for low light, but once you hit like that 4000 and 8000 ISO mark, the dual native ISO kicks in and there's pretty much little to no grain, and it's 100% usable footage if need be, if you need to be shooting at that high of an ISO. But for the GH5, in terms of camera specs, I am honestly blown away that this thing, after all the firmware updates, actually has 4K 24 FPS and I believe 30 FPS in 10-bit. That is huge for pushing your colors in the color grading section. It does have Vlog. It's not a real Vlog like the Lumix S1 has, but it does definitely help with your color grading if you want that really flat profile. I always shoot in Vlog when I did shoot with the Lumix GH5. The Cinelike D setting was also really good. I used a customized Cinelike D setting that just worked amazing. And the colors that the GH5 puts out, the color science like is really up to par with, like, it's pretty close to the S1, I'm not gonna lie. Like, you could have this as a B Cam for an interview, and if you shot in both the exact same color profile, it's really simple to match the colors together. You don't really have to manipulate it too much on the GH5 to match the S1. Now I want to touch on the button layout a little bit here. So things that I'm kind of comparing to the Lumix S1 is I love that the off and on switch is just super simple. It's just a little flick of the switch right here. Super simple to switch on and off really quickly. I never use this record button on the top. I would just click the shutter button on the top here, on the very top of the camera. I like that there's a subtle click, like it clicks in, so you can feel it when you're pressing record. Whereas with the S1, it's like a soft touch. So when I actually first got the S1 and I started shooting music videos and I'm shooting all my crazy handheld scenes, and I'd always keep my finger like just barely touching the top of the shutter button because I was so used to using the GH5. And with the GH5, I wouldn't click or I wouldn't stop recording because, you know, you'd feel that click and you have to kind of push for that shutter to engage or for you to stop recording or start recording. So the Lumix S1, I'm going crazy with these handheld shots and I kept brushing my finger against the shutter button. So I'd be like halfway through a performance scene and I wouldn't catch the rest of the performance scene, because I was so used to using the Lumix GH5. Now in terms of slow motion, this thing again is a freaking beast. It shoots 4K 60 FPS, which is insane. The Lumix S1 also shoots 4K 60 FPS. So that is super clutch off of the GH5, that you can actually shoot slow motion in 4K. Now variable frame rates are also very impressive with this camera. By variable frame rates, I mean, you know, your 90 FPS, or is it 96 FPS I think off this thing, 120 FPS and 180 FPS, which is super slow motion. And I found that it's not very grainy footage. It holds up really well. It's not noisy or anything. I feel with the Lumix S1, honestly, I think the 180 FPS, even the 120, not really the 120, well yeah, actually the 120 FPS too, because you're downscaling to 1080, it just doesn't look as clean as it does on the GH5, I'm not gonna lie. Maybe I'm just tripping, I have no idea, but I always felt that the GH5 had way less noise when shooting at higher frame rates than the Lumix S1, which is actually pretty crazy to me. Now, one other downside I will say to the GH5 is if you want to run Canon mount lenses, you need to buy a metabones speed booster. These run you around $400 to $600 US, I want to say. But these little adapters do come with a pretty hefty price tag, but I mean, totally worth it for running your Canon mount lenses. However, when you pair the Lumix GH5 with a metabones speed booster and a Sigma 18-35 f1.8 or any other lens that's f1.8, you can get this sucker down to like 1.1 or 1.2 aperture. Now, yes, that is a very tight focus that you're gonna have to pull, but you can get some pretty decent low light footage off of a micro four thirds sensor if you can get all the way down to f1.2. So that's a plus side to running the metabones speed booster, and I guess just another plus from just being able to run Canon EF mount lenses. However, if you don't want to cop the speed booster, a lens that I would highly recommend with the GH5 is the Panasonic 12-35mm f2.8. It's a very sharp lens, very comparable to the focal length of a 18-35 I felt. It's just wide enough, but zooms into that 35mm so you can get those kind of clean cinematic shots. I always find that the 35mm is just like the perfect focal length for lenses, at least for me. Like for me, my favorite lens of all time is the Sigma 35mm f1.4. I love using it on my S1, and if I had a 35mm for the Lumix GH5, I would use it, whether it was a micro four thirds lens or even just like a Canon or Sigma EF mount lens for a 35mm. And one thing that I have to touch on that is extremely relevant in 2020 as well is the in-body image stabilization. The IBIS on this camera is actually like, I would say it's the best out of any DSLR camera on the market. It's just insane how damn smooth this thing is. I mean, the Lumix S1 for a full frame camera is amazing, but the GH5 is like out of this world unbelievable. Like you can get honestly like gimbal shots, like smooth panning shots with this thing handheld if you turn on all of the IBIS options. So what are some types of videos that would benefit using a Lumix GH5 in 2020? To be completely honest, guys, I would say really anything. This is a really good starter camera considering that you can get these for as cheap as like $800 used. Unbelievable starting camera. You know, you're gonna learn all the fundamentals of how to use a camera with this thing. It's very user friendly. The menu screen is extremely simple to navigate, which is awesome for beginners, and it's just a very reliable camera. It's extremely durable. The batteries last a decent amount of time. Accessories for this thing aren't that expensive. I honestly highly recommend it in 2020 to any beginners or even experienced filmmakers that want a Lumix B Cam for a budget. So at the end of the day, yeah, I would recommend the Lumix GH5 in 2020, whether you are a beginner or a veteran shooter. It's just a nice camera to have as more of like a run and gun setup, or if you are a veteran shooter in the filmmaking game and you just want that more like run and gun setup, or maybe even like a really good travel camera, this is definitely the camera for you and is 100% relevant in 2020, considering that it has 4K 24 FPS in 10-bit and the 4K 60 FPS, as well as the variable frame rates that go all the way up to 180 FPS for really smooth, buttery slow motion, and the in-body image stabilization, which is just phenomenal. So that's pretty much it, guys. I kind of wanted to make this video because a lot of my music video tutorials and behind the scenes videos on this channel, I actually did use the Lumix GH5, and I did promote it pretty heavily just because I love this camera so much. So I wanted to come back to it, bring it back to the channel, and give you guys a little update to let you guys know if this is a relevant camera to use for filmmakers in 2020. So with all that being said, guys, thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.